Welcome and thank you for attending Suicide Awareness, a Community Approach. Please take a moment to write down these important numbers. If at any point throughout the presentation you need to reach out, please do so. I will give you a few moments to write these down before we get started. Suicide can be a difficult topic to talk about, partly because of the stigma that is still attached to it, but also because it hits close to home for a lot of us. So you might personally know someone who has died by suicide, whether that's a family member, a friend, a neighbor, a colleague, or you may have heard of someone who has died by suicide within your community. The message that we are hoping to convey here today is that suicide prevention is everyone's business. It's important to reach out to community members regarding suicide awareness because suicide is a topic that is not widely discussed. It is important that we start the conversation about suicide, not only to help break down the stigma that surrounds it, but also to educate ourselves and others about suicide and what we can do to help those who might be considering suicide. My name is Danica Ward, and my role is Community Suicide Prevention Coordinator for the Roots of Hope Project in Eastern Health on the Burin Peninsula. One of the duties of my work is to help create suicide-safe communities. And I work alongside the mental health and addictions team on the Burin Peninsula, which currently includes 10 individuals, 4 social work clinicians, an addictions counselor, 3 mental health nurses, a youth outreach worker, and myself. Suicide is a very heavy topic. Throughout this presentation, we will discuss suicide in further detail, look at some statistics surrounding suicide, common reactions to suicide, signs to look for, and ways that you can help someone who is considering suicide. Suicide can evoke some strong emotions, so I want to ensure your safety and well-being throughout. And the crisis and non-crisis resource card that was shown at the beginning is your guide for support during this webinar. If you begin to feel yourself needing to take a break to reach out for support, please do so and connect yourselves to the resource that you wish or prefer. First, I'd like to begin by telling you a little bit about the Roots of Hope project. It is a multi-community led project that aims to reduce the impacts of suicide. It is a 5-year project, which is currently in year 2, or what we refer to as the implementation phase. The end date for this project phase is currently March 31st, 2022. The project currently has 9 communities signed on across 6 provinces within this country. Newfoundland was the first to sign on, in the Burin Peninsula in particular. There are also communities in northwestern New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, Alberta, Ontario, and Nunavut. The Roots of Hope project focuses on 5 pillars: specialized supports, which include suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention services, means safety, which involves identifying means that individuals are using to take their lives and implementing safer access to these means. Research. We do have a research and policy analyst as part of our project. She helps complete things like situational analysis to determine suicide trends, completes focus groups to determine community needs, and just a lot of behind the scene work that drives the work that I, the community coordinator, engage in. Training, identifying training needs of the community members and offering services on a need-by-need basis. And public awareness campaigns involve giving presentations to the public, starting the conversation about suicide, distributing posters, and so on. Now, let us begin the conversation about suicide. And it's important to really understand the different compartments of suicide. And I've kind of laid it out such in a way that we can divide these sections to further explain suicide. Suicide is a complex process. It involves several stages. The first that we'll talk about is thoughts of suicide, sometimes referred to as suicidal ideation. Anyone can have thoughts of suicide. For example, if I were to have a bad week at university, perhaps I failed a couple of really important exams, I went through a breakup, I found out I wasn't getting into the college that I had, or the master's program or the PhD at the college that I had wanted, I may start thinking about suicide. I might think I'd be better off dead. I'm a failure, so what's the point of living? And a lot of people have thoughts of suicide. But the important thing to keep in mind is that suicidal thoughts do not always lead to a suicide attempt or a suicide. If you visit a mental health counselor or the emergency department with suicidal thoughts, a health professional, a doctor, or a nurse will likely ask you, are you having thoughts of suicide? If you answer yes, their next question will likely be, have you thought about how you will kill yourself? Or do you have a plan? Suicide plans that have been thought about in great detail warrant some new concerns, and these thoughts may lead to a suicide attempt. A suicide attempt is an action that an individual takes to try to end their life. And suicide attempts can be further divided into fatal or non-fatal, which means they can result in a person's death or maybe some other outcome. So that person may be living, but spending a short time in hospital. There could be short-term or long-term complications. There could be feelings of guilt, remorse, shame, or perhaps relief. A fatal suicide attempt results in a completed suicide in which a person has died by suicide. As you can see, not all parts have to be connected. So someone can have thoughts of suicide, but it doesn't mean that this will lead to a suicide attempt or a suicide death. And that's the important point here. So let's talk about suicide in Newfoundland and some of the statistics for that. We will be providing you with statistics from 2018 as we get the previous year's statistics in the fall of the current year. So in Newfoundland in 2018, the population was roughly 525,355 people. The reported suicides were 72. And what we know from the research is that men tend to take their lives 3 to 4 times as often as women. That is just the tip of the iceberg, because when we look at suicide, there is a much bigger picture to consider here. When you look at unreported suicides, it's usually 5 to 25% greater than the number of reported suicides. Then we have suicide behavior. If we include that, it's 40 to 100 times greater, again, than the number of reported suicides. Then there's the number of people affected. And according to the Center for Suicide Prevention, each suicide affects an average of 6 people. However, that ranges from 15 to 135 people. And then there's people with thoughts of suicide. It was estimated in 2018 that 5% of Newfoundland's population was walking around with thoughts of suicide. Given the population number, that would equal 26,267 people in Newfoundland in 2018 walking around with thoughts of suicide. That's why we say suicide is everyone's business. Let's take a closer look at the difference between the statistics in Newfoundland compared to Canada. So these statistics are based on the 2009 Statistics Canada death and mortality rate, and these are numbers per 100,000 people in the population. In 2017, approximately 17 individuals died by suicide for every 100,000 people in Newfoundland. That is higher than the national average, which is approximately 11 individuals per 100,000. Similar to Canada, men tend to take their lives much more frequently than women. And again, the same as Canada, the high-risk age group tends to be between 40 and 59 years of age. Now I want to show you Kevin's story. Kevin has lived with mental illness his whole life. He is also a suicide attempt survivor. Kevin jumped from the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, and the fall to the ocean floor is 220 feet, so 61 meters. And the sheer fact that he survived is amazing. But without giving too much of the video away, Kevin's story is about life after suicide. He talks about what he had hoped someone would have said to him, or what he had hoped someone would have done to help him. This video is not meant to glorify suicide, but is meant to teach you a very important lesson about hope, resiliency, and the importance of helping others. This video is approximately 9 minutes. Please remember your crisis and non-crisis resources should you need to use those throughout this video. I will play it and then we will describe it in a little further detail after.
At the age of 17, I developed bipolar disorder, a very severe form. It nearly cost me my life and nearly destroyed my family. My parents were in the middle of getting divorced at the time. It was a tumultuous time for my life as a teen, and I believed that I was the only one under that cloud. But that's so far from the truth, so far from fact. 50 million people around the world diagnosed mentally ill. So many more undiagnosed, but that have the diseases that are in their brains. I don't want to have this disease. I don't want to be flawed. Bipolar disorder, that's not me. I was a wrestling champion in the WCL league in California. There's no way. My football team went to state. This is garbage. And I was in so much denial. And that denial ruled the day until I crashed hard. And it was September 24th when it all came to a head. I sat at my desk and I penned that note. Mom, dad, brother, sister, girlfriend, best friend. Love you, but I gotta go. I was gonna go to the Golden Gate and I was gonna disappear. I thought I was my family's burden. I wish I asked them. I just wanted the pain to stop. That's the common denominator of people we lose to suicide. They just want the pain to stop. What they don't realize is that their thoughts don't have to become their actions. Their thoughts don't have to take over. If you can recognize those thoughts as flawed and illogical, because suicide is an irrational state of mind. You think you have to die, but you don't really want to. You know, I found myself in my father's room that morning. I startled him awake. He looked at me, said, "Kev, what's wrong?" Like with parental instinct. I said, "Nothing, Dad. I just want to tell you that I love you. It's for the very last time." And, you know, he goes, "I love you too, Kev. But it's 6 in the morning and I don't gotta be working till 9. Go back to bed." I walked around to the other side of the bed. I sat on the carpeted floor and I rocked myself back and forth in tears, begging myself to tell the one man who loves me the most in the world the truth. But the voice in my head said, "Be quiet, Kevin, you have to die." And that's what took me to the Golden Gate that morning. I took a bus there, and on that bus, all I wanted to do was scream and beg for help and live. But the voice became so loud. I sat on that bus in the back row, middle seat. I'm crying my eyes out like a baby, mucus dripping from my nose, people staring at me now. Then I'm yelling aloud at the voices in my head. I desperately wanted someone to say, "Are you okay?" I would have told them everything. Fear, apathy. There was a guy to my left, said to the fellow next to him while pointing at me with his thumb, "What the hell's wrong with that kid?" with a smile on his face. Apathy. That's his or her problem, but it ain't mine. The bus got to the bridge. I sat there crying. Bus driver turned, he stood, he looked at me and he said, "Kid, come on, get off the bus, I gotta go." I walked across the walkway of the Golden Gate Bridge for 40 minutes, up and down, back and forth, crying like a baby. Bikers, joggers, tourists, runners, they all went by me. Police officers searching for suicidal people went by me twice. I'm leaning over the rail, crying like a baby. They went by me twice. Nobody cares. And the voice in my head said, "Jump now," and I did. At the millisecond that my hands left that rail, instant regret for my actions. And the absolute recognition that I just made the greatest mistake of my life. You know, falling head first, righted my body accidentally, landed in a position that wouldn't kill me. On the way down, I said to myself, "What have I just done? I don't want to die. God, please save me." And I hit the water. I went down 70 feet beneath the water's surface, but I opened my eyes. My legs, I couldn't move. I had shattered my T12, L1, and L2 lower vertebrae into shards like glass. I had missed severing my spinal cord by 2 millimeters. I swam to the surface only using my arms. When I came to the surface, bobbing up and down in water, swallowing salt water, kept going down, couldn't stay afloat. A woman driving by in a red car saw me go over and she called her friend in the Coast Guard. The reason the Coast Guard got to my body within less than the time I would sit in hypothermia and drown was because of that woman making that phone call. The Coast Guard arrived. They fished me out of the water, they put me in a flatboard, they put a neck brace around my neck, and they started asking me a bunch of questions. Guy looks at me, he leans in, and he says, "Kid, do you know how many people we pull out of this water that are already gone?" And I said, "No, and I don't want to know." And he said, "Well, I'm going to tell you. This unit has pulled 57 dead bodies out of this water and 1 live one." I looked up at my dad and I said, "Dad, I'm sorry." And he looked down at me and with great conviction he said, "No, Kevin, I'm sorry." And waterfalls flew from his eyes. He put his hand on my forehead and he said words I've never forgotten. "Kevin, you are going to be okay, I promise." And that got me through the night. Now I had this opportunity to recover. And a lot of people think that I went from this incident and was like, "Oh, I'm so much better now. You know, oh great, it's all gone." No, this was just the beginning. In the first 3 psych ward stays, involuntary, forced in against my will. But those next 4, I found self-awareness. I found the ability to say, I'm going to accept that I have this disease. I'm going to fight it tooth and nail. I'm going to beat it one day at a time. And that's what I've been doing. Exercising every day, eating healthy most days, educating myself about bipolar disorder, being able to utilize all of those things, work them into a regimen, a routine that helps keep me here. The common denominator of recovery from mental illness is routine. There are so many things we can do that are not clinically based for all the people that don't get clinical care. If you can train your body and your mind to wake up at the same time, go to bed at the same time, take your pills at the same time if you're on medication, which helps some people and not all. Train your body and mind to eat at the same time, roughly within a 2-hour period every day. Work out even as simple as 23 minutes a day, that leads to 12 hours of better mood. Your 8-second hugs wherever you can. 8-second hugs release endorphins in the brain that make you feel better. I thought that I had one chance, one choice, and one burden to take care of. I had to die. And I was wrong. Learn from me. Know that your thoughts don't have to become your actions. You were not meant for this world to leave it by way of suicide too soon. But one thing you can never do, one thing you should never do, is silence your pain. I silenced my pain for years. I buried it deep down inside me like so many people do, and I lost myself. And it came out in a burst of rage against myself that led me to attempt to take my life. I want you to learn from me. Suicide is not the answer, and you deserve to be here for you. But your pain is valid, your pain is real, and your pain matters because you do. No matter what you think about how you aren't valued or you're worthless, it's not the truth. You have to find a way to turn back to logic. Logic says that I do get to live, you matter, you're beautiful, we need you. Please, be here tomorrow. It nearly
So that was Kevin's story, and I hope that it was a message of hope and resiliency for you. I know that every time I watch this video, I feel like I get something different from it. But one of the most important things that Kevin said was he thought he had one choice, and that choice was to die. And what we know is that most individuals who are considering suicide just want their pain to end. In Kevin's story, there was a message of hope and resiliency. And he talks about self-care and the importance of a routine and those things that worked for him. And later on in this presentation, we'll spend a little bit of time on self-care and the importance of that. But the one thing I continue to ask every single time I watch this video is, why did no one offer help? And there is a few reasons for that, and we'll talk about those now. These are some of the common reactions to suicide and to suicidal thoughts, and I've broken them down into a table for you, and this comes from the Canadian Mental Health Association. So this list is not exhaustive, and I just want you to keep in mind that, you know, we're all human. We all experience a range of emotions, and, you know, we're not perfect in our reactions, and that's okay. The important thing is, as long as we are mindful of how our actions may influence others. So let's go down through these. Apathy is a very real reaction to a suicidal behavior, because suicide is rarely considered everyone else's problem. So, you know, why would I offer to help? I don't even know this person. Then there's fear. Many individuals are afraid to ask the question, are you thinking of suicide? Because they don't really want to hear the response, or they're afraid that if the response is yes, then how do I react to that? Frustration. So maybe previous attempts to help others have been unsuccessful, or an individual is really uncertain why an individual feels this way. Empathy is another. So it's not always what we would consider a poorer reaction. Sometimes individuals can empathize with the pain that someone else is experiencing. When we look at common reactions to suicide, some of those are shame. So after a suicide death, perhaps not wanting to disclose how it was that an individual died. Guilt, feeling like there could have been more ways to help. Remorse at the loss of an individual before their time. And then anger. So, why did he or she, or why did they do this to us? So all of these, as I said, are common reactions, but it's important that we are mindful of how we respond to suicidal thoughts and to suicide deaths. And that really leads us into the next video. So again, I'll show you this video. Please keep in mind your crisis and non-crisis resources. This video is just over a minute, so it's not quite as long, but I'll show it to you and then have a conversation after. video was a really nice representation of, you know, we all are human, we all have things going on in our lives. And it's rather easy to get caught up in our personal lives and the emotions that come along with events that occur on a day-to-day basis. And I know that when I'm having a rough day, I'm perhaps not the best employee, I'm not the most time efficient, my judgment is clouded, my thoughts are racing. And that is okay. We are allowed to have off days. However, it's important that we keep in mind the impacts of how we behave and respond. And that could literally save someone's life. So I thought that was a nice video to include to kind of get us to engage in some self-reflection. That leads us nicely into helping end the stigma that surrounds suicide. And here are some of the key points that we've put together. Our actions and our language matter. And many times, individuals don't want to admit that they're having thoughts of suicide because they're uncertain what the outcome would be. However, the more we talk about suicide, the more we help break down the stigma that is attached to it. And that's essentially what this presentation is about, is starting the conversation. Taking time to know the facts, educating ourselves and others on suicide can really go a long way in helping to break down some of those barriers surrounding acceptance. And offering to help, offering to listen, connecting others to service, be a support person, while making sure, of course, to engage in your own self-care is important. And here is how our language matters. So you might have noticed the language that I have been using throughout this presentation. Died by suicide, taken their own life, fatal, non-fatal suicide attempt, and so on. And there is a reason why I choose to use this language in these phrases. The language that we use in our personal lives and in our everyday conversations can really make a world of difference. So let us take a closer look at this image, and we'll discuss some of these phrases a little further. So using a phrase such as committed suicide implies that the person who died by suicide committed a crime. And up until 1972 in Canada, suicide was illegal and was a punishable offense in the Criminal Code of Canada. So it's important that we replace the word committed with died by to help end the stigma and the message that suicide is somehow a crime or criminal behavior. Successful suicide. So when we say phrases such as successful suicide, we imply that the person wanted to die, that their outcome was a positive one. But contrary to what some people might believe, dying by suicide is not the outcome that individuals want most often. They want to end the pain that they're experiencing. So instead of saying phrases such as successful suicide, we can say things like suicide death or suicided. And similar to successful suicide, when we say things like he had a failed suicide attempt, or he tried to take his life but he was unsuccessful, or he failed, we are playing up or we're glamorizing the act of suicide. And we're also attaching a negative connotation to suicide, which again adds to the stigma. So using terminology like non-fatal removes some of that stigma and diminishes the glamour that is attached to a suicide death. It's important to also recognize that these changes don't happen overnight. So it may take some time for you to become familiar with using this terminology, and that is okay. Again, as long as we are mindful of how our language and our actions can impact others, that is the most important thing. So what are some of the warning signs of suicide? The Canadian Mental Health Association has put this poster together, and I thought it was really, really nice, a really nice display of some of the most common warning signs. They use a mnemonic, is path warm, to help us remember. But I want you to note that not all of these signs have to be present to warrant concern. So let's run through these. Ideation, thinking about suicide. And the best way to find out if someone is thinking about suicide is to ask, are you thinking about suicide, or are you thinking about killing yourself? We ask calm and directly. Substance use. Is that person having problems with drugs or alcohol? That's not their norm. Purposelessness. Do they feel like there's no purpose in life, or they no longer have any reason for living? Anxiety is another. Feeling intense anxiety or feeling overwhelmed, unable to cope, again, outside of their normal day-to-day. Feeling trapped, feeling like there's no way out of a situation, that suicide might be their only hope. Feeling hopeless, feeling helpless, things will never get better, this is the end for me. Withdrawing, avoiding family, friends, or activities that they normally once enjoyed. The opposite of that, of course, could also be true. So reconnecting with long-lost family or friends, almost in an attempt to say a final goodbye. Anger, feeling unreasonable anger, or perhaps feeling elated that they have now figured out a solution to their problems. Recklessness. Is the person engaging in risky or harmful activities normally avoided? This could be things such as driving recklessly, sexual promiscuity, and so on. Are they displaying mood changes, significant changes in mood? Again, not like that person. Some other warning signs might include giving away possessions, a previous suicide attempt, or a recent loss, employment, relationships, and so on. So if you think that someone is considering suicide, here are some ways to help. As I said previously, one of the most helpful things you can do is ask them directly about it. Ask calmly, clearly, and as soon as possible. Are you thinking of suicide? Is the most clear and direct way to ask. Although it is easy to become panicked, try to remain calm. Take all threats of suicide attempts seriously, and never assume that a suicidal ideation or an attempt is an individual's crying wolf tactic. This could be the time that they do die by suicide, so we want to make sure we take all attempts seriously. Don't minimize any of the person's feelings or try to debate with them, and engaging in a back and forth win-lose argument does nothing to really show someone you are supportive of how they are feeling. And don't agree to keep someone's thoughts of suicide a secret, even if you think that breaking confidentiality for your friendship might make them angry. Because a mad friend is better than a dead friend. Your priority is to help keep them safe, and you can work out the other things later. If that person has a suicide plan or attempts to end their life soon, we advise to connect with crisis services or supports right away. And while you are doing that, remove any obvious means of suicide if it is safe for you to do so. These things could include prescription medications, sharp objects, firearms, bullets, and so on. Tell them that they are important and that you care about them. Include their loved ones in the conversation. Ask them how others would feel without them around. Don't do anything to compromise your own safety. You cannot help someone else if you are injured or dead. And don't leave them alone until help is provided or the crisis line or emergency responders say that you can leave. Stay with the person. You might even alert 911 that you are there so they can turn off the sirens, for example, and not cause a scene. And don't try to fix their problems. Sometimes we underestimate the importance of a listening ear. Simply listening and being there for them is one of the best interventions that anyone can give. And because you're doing your very best to help others and to prevent suicide in your communities, the best way to take care of others is to take care of yourself. And that's the importance of self-care, because you cannot pour from an empty cup. Some examples of self-care might include regular mental health check-ins. And if you're familiar with the mental health continuum model, you'll begin to realize when you start to slip from the mentally well of being green into maybe yellow or red, showing that you might need some further support yourself. So make sure every now and again you check in and make sure your own mental health is intact. Physical activity works well for some. As Kevin said in his video, 23 minutes of activity boosts your mood for 12 hours. That might be a good self-care technique for you. Socializing with others might also be good. However, for some, being alone means self-care. Whatever works best for you. This does not need to be extravagant. Some people think of self-care as going away on a vacation. Does not necessarily need to be so extravagant. It could be watching a show on television, calling a friend. It may have to be planned. If you have a really busy schedule, you might need to schedule in some time for your own self-care, because it is so important to remember to take care of yourself. Finally, I wanted to run through some of the resources that are available to those who might be considering suicide, or for you to pass along to someone who might be considering suicide. So if you are in distress, we advise you to call 911 or to proceed to your nearest and local emergency department. There are also public awareness campaigns that are being run as a part of the Roots of Hope project, and here is one of them. You may have seen this on the Eastern Health's Facebook page. It's called the Check on Your Buddy campaign. It highlights that males aged 40 to 59 years are at increased risk for suicide and lists some of the warning signs for suicide. Public awareness campaigns are great resources for getting the information out and starting the conversation about suicide. Here is another resource developed in partnership with the Mental Health Commission of Canada. There are also some online resources that individuals may help find useful. The first is Bridge the Gap. It's www.bridgethegap.ca. On this website, there are two sections, one for youth and one for adults. And you can find information on a variety of topics, including suicide. So I do advise you to check out that website. And you're probably viewing this presentation on this website, so you've already done that, which is wonderful. They also have the 30-day mindfulness challenge, and you can invite a friend or a colleague to participate with you, and I would advise you to participate in that also if you have the time to do so. There are also toolkits for individuals who have been impacted by a suicide loss as well as a suicide attempt, and these are available on the Mental Health Commission of Canada's website, listed in the resource section at the end of this presentation. Eastern Health also launched a new mental health and addictions website that contains some wonderful information. There is also a section under the About Us tab on the Roots of Hope project and suicide prevention. So we encourage you to check those resources out as well. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to view this webinar, and I hope that you find some of the information useful. And again, feel free to check out the resources available throughout, as well as those available on the references section. Thank you so much, and I hope you stay safe.